Coffee and a winter morning just goes so good together. Hello friends, welcome back to another video. If you are new here, hi, welcome. My name is Kim and I am an author illustrator, and here on my channel I like to create cozy and intentional content about books, writing, and lifestyle. I love to share my love for books on here, and I also like to do videos on my writing journey and just, cozy life stuff. So if those are all things that you like, subscribe. I post videos twice a week on here. Today I bring you a January reading wrap up. I read some amazing gems this month. My reading goal every month is to read 4 books. The month of January, I definitely surpassed those goals. I read 7 books. I am so proud of myself for having read 7 books. I would consider myself more of a slower paced reader, which there's nothing wrong with that. I love reading slow and cozy and intentionally, but for some reason in January I was speeding through books. I was super focused, and I actually had some really good books I was reading in January, so that kept me pumped. So if you are new here and you don't know what kind of books I like to read, I am a fiction girly, okay? I love reading my fiction and my fantasy. I love mysteries and thrillers. Those are my jam. I am literally obsessed with those kinds of books. I love a good fantasy and fictional book. So I believe all the books that I read in January were within that realm, except for one. I did read one contemporary book, but besides that, they were all in the fiction fantasy realm. And like I said, you guys, I had a really good reading month in January. It was a perfect month to kickstart off the year in my reading goals. In my very loosely committed reading goals, I will say, because I don't like committing to reading goals. That gives me severe anxiety, so I do not do that. But I do like to push myself to at least read 4 books a month. And I am excited to let you all know what I read. So hopefully maybe you discover some new authors, or maybe you get into these books, or maybe you already read these books and you just want to know what other people thought about it. I don't know. I already have my coffee here. I already have our little candle burning over here. Grab something warm to drink, grab some snacks, grab some water, grab a blanket. So with that being said, friends, let's talk about some books. Okay, so I actually lucked out with the first book that I read in January. And this is a book that I picked up. I went on a little family trip for New Year's, and I came across this cute bookstore, and I seen this gorgeous book there. This is Alebrijes by Donna, Barba, Higuera. And I had never heard of this book. I clearly was living under a rock because I was like, wow, that looks so gorgeous. And Alebrijes is a sort of folklore animal or creature in my culture, so I'm very familiar with what alebrijes are and what they look like. So I immediately picked this up, and you guys, I am so glad that I did, because I feel like this by far is going to be one of my favorite books that I've read maybe this year. Well, for sure it was a favorite book that I read in January. So Alebrijes is actually a middle grade sci-fi fantasy set in a dystopian world in the city of Pocatel, and we are following our main protagonist, who is a 13-year-old pickpocketer named Leandro and his sister Gabby. So Leandro is a descendant of the Cascabeles people, and the Cascabeles are descendants of people who worked in the San Joaquin Valley for many generations, like in the fields. So Leandro comes from those ancestors, and in Pocatel, people just do not like Cascabeles, but they have granted them safety, quote unquote safety, from the outside world, because they live in a dystopian world where there's like monsters and such outside of the city of Pocatel. So Leandro works in the fields picking potatoes alongside other Cascabeles, and one day Leandro and his sister are out and about pickpocketing, and his sister actually steals a strawberry and she ends up eating it. She gets caught up and Leandro takes the blame for it. Fast forward, Leandro gets exiled from Pocatel, but he is given an unusual opportunity. He is asked if he would like to put his consciousness in a alebrije drone. Now, if you're unfamiliar with what alebrijes are a Mexican folklore animal that is usually meshed into, it's like 2 animals meshed into one. They usually have beautiful patterns on them. If you've seen the movie Coco, they come out on there and they're just so beautiful. So Leandro gets the opportunity to be able to put his consciousness in an alebrije drone, and he is told that there are more alebrijes Kidrons outside of Pocatel, and if you can go get them and bring them back to Pocatel. So a little wary and all, but Leandro takes the chance and he does it. But of course, beyond the walls of Pocatel, there are many things like monsters. It's a wasteland of pirates, and also there lies a hidden truth beyond the walls of Pocatel. I absolutely adored this book because even though it's a middle grade, it also carried very, I guess, heavy topics and very real topics. This is a story for me that was about justice and liberation and fighting for those who are oppressed, all meshed within the veil of Mexican folklore. And it just had beautiful world building. It was a very unique story. I've never read anything like this. I've been comparing this book to like Dune meets Mad Max because it kind of sounds like that, but just with a very much younger protagonist. This was just fun and it was just easily digestible for me. This was actually a solid 4 stars for me. And then you guys, I read the epilogue on this and I was stunned. This immediately became a 5 stars for me, and I quickly went to go pick up the other book, which is a book that came out before Alebrijes, and it's called The Last Cuentista. I have not read it yet, but I cannot wait to read The Last Cuentista. If you read this book and you read the epilogue, you're just gonna be like, what? So good. This was immediately a 5 stars after I read that epilogue. And the next book that I read, it was actually an audiobook, and that was The Cruel Prince by Holly Black. This is a fantasy YA romance novel about humans and fairies. I love a good fairy book. I love anything that has to do with the fays, and this was very much a book that I'd seen everywhere. I feel like if you are trying to get into fairies, or if you're looking into fae books, this is definitely one of the top contenders that usually comes up when you are looking up fairy books. This follows our main protagonist, whose name is Jude, and Jude at 7 years old unfortunately witnesses her parents being murdered, and her other sisters get taken to go live at a high court of fairies. So they're pretty much, I don't know, like kidnapped, taken. And then you sort of fast forward like 10 years later and you see Jude and her sisters all grown up now, and Jude desperately wanting to fit into this court of fairies. Of course, no one really likes her because she is human. And even though she sort of gives off the impression that she dislikes the fae, she secretly wants to be like them. She wants to be a fae. Somewhere in the story, there's like a big betrayal that happens, and the fae king at that time gets, let's just say, removed from the throne. And the only one left after the king is removed, who is supposed to take over the throne, is his wicked son named Prince Carden. And Jude is faced with a rare opportunity to either help Prince Carden, because they're looking for him so they can also take him off the list. So Jude can either help him or she can defy him. And if she defies him, she is told that she will be granted a place at the high court of fairies. To be completely honest, this was an okay read for me. I feel like this book was severely overhyped. I liked it. I think it was a good story, but I don't think it was a great story. But then again, I believe this is a trilogy, so maybe I do have to read the other 2 books to really get more invested into the storyline. So I don't know. I'm still gonna read the other 2 books because I am interested in this story. I want to see what all the buzz is about. And it's not like I did not like the story, but it was just an okay read for me. So I believe I gave this book like a 3.5, which is still pretty okay. By the way, if you hear me a little groggy, that is because I am getting over a cold. I do feel a lot much better, but I still sound a little stuffy. So just putting it out there. Now, the next book that I read is a book that I had been highly anticipating to read. And I picked this book up as soon as it came out last year, and I didn't get a chance to read it last year. So I made it a priority to read it in the month of January. And that is A Study in Drowning by Ava Reid. This is a YA fantasy romance novel with a little bit of specks of mystery thrown in there. I believe this is classified as a sort of dark academia-ish book, which I love a good dark academia book. And in this story, we are following Effie, and Effie is a college student in this world. And Effie studies architecture, which is pretty much like one of the few degrees or careers that a woman in this world can study. Go figure. But Effie really wants to be a writer, and she can't study that because in this world, it is said that women are not smart enough to be able to study writing or become writers, or anything to do with literature, I believe. So in this world, there's like this famous writer, and everyone's literally obsessed with him, and his name is Emrys Murden, I believe, something like that. And he is super famous because he wrote a novel called Angarod, which is about a fairy king, and literally everyone is obsessed with this story. And of course, Effie is too. That is like her favorite writer of all time. And one day, Effie gets an opportunity to go to the now deceased famous writer's home to be able to make a sort of architecture plan to reconstruct his home, because his home is falling apart. The home is located on a sort of seaside cliff, and the cliff is collapsing and the house is going with it. So Effie gets an opportunity to go and be able to make a sort of map to rebuild the house. She is invited by the famous writer's son to go over there and help him out with that. So Effie goes, and when Effie goes, she meets another student who is also from her college. He's in like the literature writing department. So you get a sort of like enemies to lovers trope on there, because they do not get along, and Effie sort of dislikes him because of that, because he is able to study something that she would love to study, but because she's a woman, she can't. So the other student that is there, his name is Preston, and he is working on some sort of author biography on the famous writer who now passed. But what Effie doesn't know is that Preston is actually working on some sort of hidden truths about the author, and when Effie finds out, she has a hard time accepting that because that is her favorite author. But somewhere along the road, Effie decides to help him. Now, Effie is a very unreliable character. At first, I had a really hard time liking her character. She has been through some really hard and traumatic things that are mentioned in this book, which of course reflect how her character is written out. And because of the traumatic things that she has been through, she sort of like sees the fairy king, like the fairy king that is written in the famous writer's story. She isn't sure whether she is seeing that like for real or if it's just like her imagination. And you honestly don't really get a sort of answer to that even when the book ends, which was very frustrating. But this is a story about men in power, and particularly abusing of their power. This is a story about heroes, our heroes, the people that we look up to not being who they say they are. This is a story about prejudice against women. The writing is haunting. It is beautiful. It is very atmospheric. This is my first Ava Reid book that I've ever read, and I can see the hype around her books. I have her other book, I believe is Juniper and Thorn, which I have not read, but I can see the hype in her book. It is very dark and eerie and atmospheric, and I absolutely loved it. I will say that I was not a fan of the actual story itself. I did not find it to be very unique, but because of the writing style, I did end up enjoying the book, but just the storyline sort of fell short for me. I do wish we would have gotten some sort of conclusion on the Fairy King. And to be honest, I wish the Fairy King was more involved in this storyline. I feel like it would have added more of the fantasy specs to it, and I didn't get that much. This was more of a sort of mystery type of book for me. But beautiful writing, beautiful prose on here. I think I gave this maybe a 3.5 or a 4. This is definitely up there for me. Okay, friends, moving along. This next book, I will be honest, I had a hard time getting into it because it is a contemporary read. And right now, I'm honestly not into anything that has to do with contemporary. Just give me all the fiction and fantasy. But this book is a book that came up for my January TBR to read from my little TBR jar, and I did not want to disappoint myself, so I pushed myself to read it, and I did enjoy it. And that is How the Garcia Girls Lost Their Accents by Julia Alvarez. I have been wanting to read more of Julia Alvarez's works, and I had picked this book up in their other book, In the Time of Butterflies, like about a year ago, and I had not gotten to them, so I was quite excited when this did come up. But again, because I have not been in a contemporary mood, I had a hard time getting into this one. This is a YA contemporary historical fiction novel about 4 sisters who are the Garcia sisters. This is set in the 1960s, and we follow the Garcia family moving from the Dominican Republic to New York City after their father has an involvement to overthrow the evil dictator Rafael Trujillo. This is a sort of sequence of short stories told from the perspective of the 4 sisters. And the first thing that kind of threw me off about this book is that these short stories, or like they're like short story memories, they're told in a reverse chronological order, which I didn't understand at first, but it is told from when they are adults all the way to when they're kids. And I was not a huge fan of that. It kind of threw me off and I had a hard time pinpointing the timelines. But this shows the family having to adapt to American lifestyle when they moved from the Dominican Republic to New York City and having to sort of assimilate to American life. This book does give a clear outlook in what it looks like when a family migrates to another country and having to leave what you're used to behind in your homeland and having to adapt to a new language, to a new life, how you sort of have to leave your customs behind and even your language in a way, and have to project yourself into a new culture that you're so unfamiliar with. I will say that I absolutely loved the language in this book. I think it was hilarious, and as a first generation daughter of undocumented parents, I related to this book so much on so many levels. The way that the sisters talk to one another, the way that they talk to their aunts, and when they even go back to their homeland, because they do, even as adults, go back to the Dominican Republic to visit family, and how that feels, how that looks like, seeing the difference between having been raised here in the States and then going back to your homeland, and just the disparities that there are. This was definitely a very much relatable book. I really did enjoy it. I wish I would have read this when I was more into reading contemporary, but unfortunately I just haven't been into that. But I'm so glad that I finally got to it and that I read it, because it had been sitting on my shelf for a while now and I felt so bad, but I finally read it and I really loved it. I think I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars. So I believe these two, A Study in Drowning and How the Garcia Girls Lost Their Accents, were part of my TBR jar. So I was able to get to those. Now the next few books that I read were just because I felt like it, and they had just been either sitting on my Libby or sitting on my Kindle, and I just wanted to get to them. So the next book that I read, which I have been trying to read for the longest time now, was The Name Bearer by Natalia Hernandez. And I read this on Libby as an audiobook. I actually read this book as part of a reading vlog for my patrons. By the way, I just relaunched my Patreon and I do a lot of cool things over there. I do reading vlogs. We have a book club. We are called the Story Keeper Society Book Club, and it is just cozy and cool. I do videos, exclusive videos on there. I do snail mail. I have downloadables. I have a lot of cool stuff over there. So if you're interested in joining a cozy book community, then maybe check out my Patreon. So back to The Name Bearer. This is a YA queer fantasy sci-fi-ish novel. This is the first book in the installation of The Flowers of Prophecy. So I believe there's another one to this book, and I think that book came out last year. I don't know if this is just a duology or if this is going to be a trilogy, because I've only read The Name Bearer. Also, something that I just found out is that this is actually self-published. That is amazing. Kudos to anyone who self-publishes any book out there. I know how the publishing industry can work, and it is a lot of work that goes into self-publishing, and just my utmost respect to folks who self-publish. That is so admirable. So in this book, we are following our main character, who is the Name Bearer. I'm just gonna call her the Name Bearer because she does go through a surge of different names in the book, which actually I'm a fan of, but just for staying on the same page, we're just gonna call her the Name Bearer because that is who she is. The name bearers in this story are people who are chosen by prophetic flowers. Okay, prophetic flowers. These are giant flowers that tell you prophecies. So these giant prophetic flowers choose who the name bearer is. Every X amount of generations, they choose a new name bearer. And in this story, we're following one name bearer. And the name bearers are trained in the history of names, what names mean, what they indicate, and all of that good stuff. Everything relating to names. Once they get educated on names and a new king is born in this world, once the king and queen have a baby, the name bearer's sole job is to go to the Flowers of Prophecy and ask the Flowers of Prophecy what to name the new baby king. So our name bearer, after having trained her whole life in the history of names, goes to the Flowers of Prophecy prophecy when a new baby king is born and asks the flowers of prophecy to give her the new name of the baby that was just born. However, the flowers say that is not the new king. Another king was born, and you must go and find this new king that was born and bring him to us so we can name him. Of course, the name bearer is taken aback and she's like, what do you mean? There was only one king born. How can there be another one? So in that moment, our name bearer chooses to sort of leave. So she in a way is exiled and she has a target on her back. And with the help of a wizard, she ends up hiding away at an all-women's warrior institute academy. She ends up being there for many years. She studies how to become a warrior and how to fight. But she knows that one day she's gonna have to fulfill her task and go and find the new king and bring that new king, whoever they may be, to the flowers of prophecy so she can clear her name. With all that being said, I feel like this story has a really good start and it tells you right off the back what the purpose of the name bearer is, what her task is, what she must do in this story, what the plot is. And then she goes off to this all-women's warrior institute. She's there for many years and you sort of get most of that storyline in the first book. There's like a huge chunk of the name bearer being at this warrior institute. She ends up making friends with these amazing group of other women, which I loved for her because she grew up very isolated. And then you get more of the action part, more of the what the whole point of this story is, very much towards the end of the book. I feel like if it would have been more of a balance on both of them, I would have loved this book a lot more. I feel like I left this book with still so many questions and like no closure being done. I understand there's like another book to this, but I feel like there was no closure whatsoever on this story that we're told is the whole main point of this book. Overall, I still enjoyed the book because I just felt like it was a very unique book. It is full of magic and wonder. It is rooted in Latine folklore. It has magic, it has romance, it has beautiful friendships. I will say that the many love interests that are happening in this book, especially with our main character, sort of kind of threw me off as well, but also it kind of kept things interesting. I believe I gave this book 4 out of 5 stars and I'm excited to read the next one. All right, friends, we have 2 more books to go, so we're almost to the end of this video. So the next book that I read is another book that I read with my patrons on a reading vlog, and that is Halfling, a Monster Romance by S.E. Wendel. Let me tell you the story of how I came across this book, okay? One day, I was sitting here on my cozy little desk and I was like, I really want to read something cozy. I'm in the mood for cozy. I had just gotten my Kindle. I was super excited to browse through the Kindle free books to read, and I was looking for cozy books, something that gives off legends and lattes vibes and all of that good stuff. And I found a few. And this one, Halfling, was one of them. I was very drawn in by the cover of the book. It looked cozy. I love the colors. You have a human girl, what it looks like on the cover, a human girl, and then like this green orc on the cover. So I was like, ooh, this looks cool. Let's give this a try. In my head thinking, this is just gonna be super cozy and cute and we're gonna have a good time. When I tell you guys, I did not know what I was walking into. I really had no idea because I did not do proper research on this book. Sure, I read the synopsis, but I did not read people's comments about this book. And listen, I am not mad at it. I still had a very good time, but I could have probably used a heads up on this. Okay, so in this book, we are following our main character whose name is Oric, and Oric is a half human, half orc. Oric is part of this clan of orcs, and his clan has never really liked him because he is half human. So his whole life he's had to sort of prove himself to his clan, and he's always had a hard time just fitting in. And one day Oric walks into the leader of his clan's tent and he ends up finding this human woman tied up, and that sort of reminds him of what happened to his own human mother. So in an attempt to not repeat history, Oric decides to free the human woman. He sympathizes with her and he chooses to untie her and lead her back into the woods so she can make her way home. So as he lets her go, some things happen and she gets into some trouble, and Oric decides to just escort her all the way to her house, which is a very, very long trip. But something about her, he just wants to be around her. And so he escorts her all the way to her home, and along this very long journey, you could see Oric and the human girl fall for each other. And let me tell you guys, when they do, it is no stopping them, okay? This has smut written all over it. It is smutty to the core. I have not read a lot of smut since I've picked up reading again, so I have nothing to really compare this book to, but it was explicit to say the least. So when they arrive to her home, all in love and such, they of course encounter more problems, and Oryx sort of has to fight for the love of his life. And so does she, because he is an orc and humans don't usually accept orcs. I will say that I really enjoyed the love between these two. These are very likable characters. I loved the devotion that they have for each other. It was just so sweet and fluffy. I think this was a very good combination of just cozy, sweet, fluffy, smutty with fantasy, and you get a pet raccoon. How cute is that? I believe the author S.E. Wendel does a lot of these types of monster romance novels. I think she has another one out where it's like a gargoyle who falls in love with the human and then an orc who falls in love with the fairy. I was very excited when I found that out, because even though I came across this book with other intentions, this was actually a very fun book to read. So I will definitely be checking out more S.E. Wendel monster romance novels. I think I gave this book like a 4 stars. It was pretty funny. It was cute, cozy. I loved it. All right, friends, we are to our last book that I read in January. Honestly, this is probably also a top favorite that I read in the month of January. And it was a very short book. I wish it would have been longer, but I get why it was the length it was, and it did exactly what it needed to do. So the last book that I read in January was The Deep by Rivers Solomon. I listened to the audiobook on Libby, and you guys, this was only 5 hours. I finished this so quickly, and the storyline was just breathtaking. It was so beautiful. So this is a fantasy sci-fi novella about water-breathing descendants of African slave women who were tossed overboard when they were enslaved to bring to the countries that were being colonized. In this novella, we are following our main character, whose name is Yetu, and Yetu is the keeper of her people's memories. And Yetu is a survivor of the enslaved women who were tossed overboard. But now Yetu and her people have evolved into, I guess you could say, sirens or mermaids in a way, but they don't use that term in this novel. They just call them water-breathing descendants of enslaved African women. But Yetu and her people, they all live underwater, and they have been able to preserve their everyday lives. However, in this novella, they choose one person to carry on the memories of the history that their people have gone through. In this case, yes, the tragic and traumatic history that has happened to them, but as well as other traditions and history. So everyone forgets about their history. Everyone except Yetu. Yetu is responsible to carry on the memories, and in a sort of like, I don't know if it's like an annual or like yearly or every other year type of ritual, but Yetu does some sort of ritual to where she allows her people to remember their history for a time being. However, every time Yetu allows her people to remember, it is sort of like draining her out of her own life in a way, and she cannot carry on with this burden of carrying on these very traumatic memories and history that her people have gone through all by herself. So this yearly type of ritual that she is doing for her people is sort of consuming her and killing her. So she decides to flee. And when she does, she ends up somewhere in another part of the ocean, and she meets some friends. And these friends teach her about the importance of remembering, the importance of our history, and the importance of our roots and our culture, and why it is important to remember and to pass on that knowledge and that history to those that come after us. These friends of hers tell her why it is so important to reclaim lost history and to be able to reconnect to our ancestors and be able to tell these stories. And rather than to perceive these stories as something that hurt us or haunt us or even kill us, which in many instances you can escape that torture, but also how we can transform that pain of our history into beautiful moments of triumph and survival, and to reclaim the fact that we are still here. We have survived, and we are here to tell our own story. This honestly was such a short novella, but it was so impactful. It is one of the most beautiful historical fiction books that I have ever read in such a short composed of words. To be able to imagine what history has done to marginalized people and to be able to transform that into a beautiful history about reclaiming our history, our roots, and our resilience was just so beautiful. I had to sit with this story for some time because of course it brought up so much for me. I started to think about my own people and about my own culture, about my own roots, and how we in the end are capable of creating stories for ourselves that embraces our roots and our culture. Rather than having to assimilate, we can lean into our roots and rewrite those stories by authentically living in our truth, whatever truth that might be for you. Because I believe that we have all been displaced somehow. It doesn't matter what your racial background is, we have all been victims of displacement in one way or another. And I believe that leaning into our roots and our culture is a beautiful way to be able to reclaim our history. So this was just so beautiful. It brought up so much for me and I just didn't want it to end, but I understand why it did what it did. I highly recommend for you to listen to this story. It's only 5 hours long on Libby if you want to listen to this on audiobook format. And also it was narrated by Daveed Diggs. And if you don't know who Daveed Diggs is an actor and I absolutely love all their work. And that was a beautiful surprise. I am definitely going to be reading more Rivers Solomon. I have been looking into their books and they have a lot of beautiful books out there. So that is a new author that I just discovered that I am going to be getting more into. So friends, that was all the 7 books that I read in the month of January. That is my reading wrap up for January. I'm curious to know what you read in January. Let me know what you thought about them. Let me know if the books that I read sound interesting to you. Let me know if you read some of them and what your own perspective was on these books. I would love to know. I always love to hear from you guys, and also by you engaging with this video helps my channel out so much. So friends, that was January. I'm excited for February. I've already been reading some great books. I really hope that you're having a great reading year so far. Stay safe, stay warm, stay cozy. I hope you read some amazing books, and I will leave you with a quote of this year, and that is to remember that you can create the life that you want, because you so deserve it, friend. Thank you again, friends, and I will see you in a video soon. Take care and bye for now.